Hello, and I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to Platform 1 2015. My name's Marcus Hume Humphreys, and I'm the Managing Director of Route 6. And it's a great pleasure to be standing here at what is the 6th annual Platform 1 event that we've run. During the day, we'll be imparting our thoughts and experiences on 4 topical industry subjects. And as a reminder, our agenda is, first off, slightly later than advertised, we're going to be talking about file-based delivery. Now, in this particular subject, we're going to be talking about DCP, IMF, and AS-11 DPP. There'll be a coffee break at about 11 o'clock. 15 minutes later, we're going to be talking about remote working. That covers 2 aspects of working remotely. One is remote editing, and the other is remoting desktops. We've got an hour and 15-minute lunch break, and then we're talking about migrating from SDI to IT networks. It's actually a far broader subject than that, and Phil's going to impart a huge amount of information about his experience in this area, monitoring for UHD and 4K, and then the last session of the day is about 4K and UHD. Beyond the hype. So, as I've mentioned, really, there are frequent breaks and a 1.25 hour lunch break. We're lucky enough to have the support of a large number of the manufacturers that we at Route 6 represent. Each manufacturer has their own demo area, either at the back of this hall or in the lobby area between here and the front door. And this is really a great opportunity for you to speak to these manufacturers and find out more about their products in detail. I won't go through what each of them does, because that's really why they're here, but we will be making reference to a lot of the products that these manufacturers are responsible for during the course of the day and during our presentations. So first up, Rupert and Bill are going to be talking about efficient file-based delivery.
Cool. Right, good morning everyone. Thanks for joining us here today at Platform 1. So yeah, our first seminar and session is looking at efficient file-based delivery. So myself, I'm Bill, and I work as part of the development team here at Route 6. So we've got Route 6, the reseller, and we've got this offshoot that's existed since about 2002, which is Route 6 Technology. And we developed a product called Content Agent, of which many of you in this room are users. Now, we've done lots of presentations going through and introducing AS-11, DPP, and file delivery as a topic. So this year is sort of a change, and now that nearly everyone in this room is doing it in some capacity, we're going to revisit file delivery 1 year on, look at what's gone well, what's gone not so well, and how we've risen to those challenges. So efficient file-based delivery, just as a quick run-through of what we'll talk about today. We're going to set the scene very quickly, and I think that paints a pretty good picture of changes leading up to where we're at, and tells the story in itself. And then look at some of the workflows that people were implementing, particularly using Content Agent. So at the start of DPP delivery, how were people doing it, and what are the efficient workflows that we implemented straight off the bat. And then, again, what was good about those workflows, but what was not so good. There's always room for improvement. And so thus, as the next point, how did we improve, and what's next? So, setting the scene, just as a brief revision of history, some of you have been intimately involved with this process already, but so the DPP first joins in 2009, informally, and I think people often forget that the DPP encompasses other forms of delivery, including digital tape delivery. So tape delivery standard actually is what comes first. We then follow up in 2012 with the publication of AS-11, so the parent specification of which UK DPP have created a shim, AS-11 UK DPP. So AMWA, if you don't know who they are, the Advanced Media Workflow Association, I think, they make all sorts of frameworks and describe frameworks for applications of media, particularly involving MXF and AAF. So this extends from AS-11, which is about standardising edit formats within an AAF file, through to AS-12 at the moment, which is short-form delivery, and we're looking at everything from archival content to end-to-end MXF workflows. And AS-11 is all about long-form program contribution to a playout facility. So, funnily enough, that application, that particular framework, is sponsored and owned, as it were. Every framework is owned by someone, is owned by BBC R&D, and shortly after that, the DPP published their first file delivery deadline. Specification, and then shortly after that, IBC announced the file delivery deadline, 1st of October 2014, which we've sailed past with consummate ease. So there we are. And at the same time, compliance program came out. So this is all about certifying devices which either write files, read files, or analyze files. And essentially the idea is that if my DPP compliant writer creates a file, my DPP compliant reader is going to be able to read that file structurally and understand the syntax of that file. So again, Content Agent was intimately involved with that compliance program right from the start, and we were one of the first devices to be certified at IBC 2014. File delivery deadline arrives, just like a dream. We seamlessly segue into file delivery, and we've now got some features coming out, the first one being in the form of our SD commercial delivery specification. So just as a quick aside, for those of you that don't know Content Agent and don't know the product, Content Agent is a file-based workflow automation tool. So it's all about automating common file-based tasks. Now obviously transcoding is a really important part of that, but Content Agent extends far wider than that, right the way on the end-to-end file-based spectrum. And we can look at automating with little to no intervention, things like file distribution, ingest, copying, backups, metadata functions, authoring, quality control with some of our, and correction with some of our partners. So it's all about taking those traditionally disassociated operator steps and allowing you to design bespoke processes to automate them, again, with little to no intervention. And at the heart of that is the workflow designer, so a nodal workflow designer that you can design your processes through. And just as an idea of some of the things that we touch and can help with using the Content Agent product, beyond file delivery, camera card ingest, so just launched Card Agent, which is proving to be a popular, easy to use user interface for automating camera card ingest, standards conversion, which will be in UHD workflows, which we'll be talking about again a bit later in the afternoon using Content Agent. So quite a few of these processes people are automating, or Content Agent's playing some part in somewhere. So when file delivery arrived and people cracked open their Content Agent to do some lovely file-based delivery, what were the sort of workflows that people were implementing? So sitting with Content Agent at the heart of this, the general workflow recipe, and everywhere is different, but the general, as a summary, the general workflow that we found people work for them is sort of illustrated here in pseudo workflow form. So in edit, people could be, online editors could be cutting away, whatever, and they could export a quick QuickTime reference export of that segment and pass it to us in order to check their content as they go along. And the idea was that as they got to the end of the edit, they were pretty sure they were going to have a timeline that was compliant. So they could export, as maybe they finished a part, they could export to us a QuickTime reference export of that segment, and Content Agent would automatically go and create some ABC intro essence of that. So We would encode that and then validate it with a QC product of choice. Obviously, that choice is nearly entirely seemed to be the checker. So validated with that, and then with content agent controlling the process, it would pass back an automated branded report email back to the editor. So generally we found this process on sort of modern hardware, it's a bit quicker now on some of the newer releases, but modern hardware will take maybe 10 minutes for a 10-minute part. So, you know, coffee break and a toilet break, and you come back and you've got a pretty good idea of how it's got on and what changes need to be made. Once they're happy with that, they've got a timeline that works, we could then come down to the delivery point here. So same export, QuickTime reference of that whole segment, they can pass it to us, and at that point content agent will create the complete AS-11 UK DPP file. So an AMWA certified file, create all the essence, create the specification wrapping all the metadata, and at the same time, we'd be orchestrating the validation and feedback of those results back to the operator or whoever it was deemed necessary to find out. Using our sort of logic engine and decision structures, people could decide if they wanted to go off to a delivery area, maybe for tech review or whatever, or if there were changes to be made, we could feed that back in a way we sort of go looping this. I'm sure there's always changes to be made. So we found that was worked pretty well for a lot of people. So that would, generally the feedback we got is that that would reduce operator steps from about 10 disassociated operator steps now to about 2 or 3. So it definitely helped in some ways. So there are a lot of successes to take away from that, as I say. So automating and centralizing the process reduced operator error, it sped up and freed up edit suites to make money and do what they're there for, which is craft editing. And significantly increase the throughput as well, and automation and creation of the assets that might need to go alongside, such as new copies. We also did find that checking in ABC Intra did reduce discrepancies in between people who would sort of check as their online mezzanine format and people checking as their final delivery format. It's differences between codecs, transforms, bit depth and whatnot can produce different results, and it's only sort of a natural occurrence. So that helped the process as well. But it wasn't perfect at this stage, so final changes still took too long. And this was feedback that everyone had about file delivery, not just specific to content agent, but it did take a while. And equally at this time, there was no real nice way of getting metadata perhaps in between the suite to operators in the machine room or whoever. There's a lot of discourse about whose job it is to provide that metadata. So at that point we went away, scratched our heads and thought about how we could solve them and implement them back into the workflows that people were already using. So one of them was changing metadata. So synopsis error, a PSE status change, phone numbers change, there's lots of descriptive metadata embedded into a DPP file. And changing that is actually a bit of a problem if you're not doing it properly. So ultimately at the beginning, a change, and this is the same if you use the DPP app, lots of products. If you want to update the metadata of a file but keep the same essence, you're effectively having to copy 60 gigs of data. So that's what a rewrap is. You're copying it out, copying it back in as a new structure. So however long it takes to copy your volume of data plus about 5 or 10% of time is generally the rule of thumb about how long a rewrap takes. And equally, people were predicting certain metadata field values, so before it had even necessarily passed the final PSE check, there were files floating around that had their PSE status as passed in, sort of a preemptive strike, and lots of people found that was a bit dangerous. Files could be sent out that actually had failed PSE but were flagged as correct. So the facility to update this instantly is actually already built into the AS-11 specification. So at the if you think of your structured MXF file with the header, the body, and the footer, the DPP actually specified, AMWA in their AS-11 specification specified 8 kilobytes of free space at the end of the header, in between the header partition and the body partition. So the tools are already there. to implement an instant update of the file. So we released the ability to instantly update the metadata on the file. The same file, the UIDs were all the same, the essence stays in the same place. And this meant that in 10 seconds rather than half an hour, people could instantly update the metadata in their DPP file and no longer sort of big rewraps with the DPP tool, for example. So this meant workflows could be done that automatically updated the PSE status of a file after it had passed its PSE check. And equally, last-minute changes, typos, etc. in the synopsis, contact details could be easily and robustly dealt with. So that was a real time saver, a real enabler, and a lot of people are using that now in their workflows to update files. But there was an even bigger sort of elephant in the room, and that was the change to the program content. So, as with late deliveries, with final program delivery in general, a lot of the feedback was, and has always been, we need to be able to insert edit. We need to be able to change our files at the last minute, and remaking files is a huge pain. It goes beyond just the time it takes to transcode and create an AS-11 file. It's validating that file, it's checking that file, it's performing another visual QC because it's a new file. So pretty much last-minute changes were impossible, and if you did need to remake a file ahead of, even weeks ahead of delivery, it's a long time. It's a lot of expensive operators' time. So we went away, scratched our heads, put them together, and came up with the world's first file-based insert edit. So using the same file, we could now go into that at a point that you wanted and insert edit new frames into the bit stream so that your file was unnoticeably changed, but with the new pictures. So technically you wouldn't notice any difference, but you've got new essence content. We could go right into the bit stream, so no rewrapping or anything, and perform an insert edit over those points. So that would allow you to, at the last minute, change the program content, no change to the file metadata or header. It's exactly the same file again, same UIDs, same data structure. You would be very hard pressed to tell that we had insert edited into it. No rewrap or post-processing required, so I could immediately go away and then AMA link that file into my media composer, and the changes are there. So I could play it VLC. The only way you could really tell is by having a detailed look at the bit stream. And we've yet to find a device which notices that it has been inserted. Just audio, video, both, so there's full flexibility in between time codes and tracks as to how you can insert it. And again, it's almost instant. It's doesn't matter if you've got a 3-hour program or 10-minute program, it will instantly insert into that file. It's an insert edit. Again, we found lots of people, and again, QC processes are something which are bespoke to certain places and people take different looks on. But a lot of people, when they will recreate a file, they'd have a new vid checker report, so they would go and do a whole watch through of that, check for the blanking notifications or whatever, and that could take them up 3 or 4 hours for an hour-long program. So that was saving them a lot of time, and that they could, it was the same vid checker report, same file, and they could just go back and look at those points and check in the spot check the edits were correct. And again, unlike a tape, you can track and instantly undo the insert edits as well. So we'll keep a full log of everything that's changed within your file and how the insert process has been performed. And ultimately, it's still the same file as before. It's ready to go. So just a quick idea of the user interface. So I can line up as many inserts as I need, choose just audio, whatever. The idea is that you can go back to your editor timeline, perform your updates, export. It doesn't take very long to do a 5-second export or whatever. I can't quite see the volumes that I've done there, but you can line up as many as you need, hit go, and all get inserted. So just some of the feedback people have said. Again, in that QC process, it can say 4 to 5 hours per delivery, enables near tape-style workflows, and improves cost efficiencies in delivering late files. There's a quote for a website, if ever I heard one. So, that was a real step forward, and lots of people adopted that very early on. We've had, it must be well over 100 sort of inserts go to air now without people. We've never had any feedback from broadcasters or rejections due to those, so that's only got to be a good thing. And again, one of the other problems that I sort of touched on earlier was easy access to metadata in the workflow. So there was sort of a weird sort of interchange of emails flying around, Excel spreadsheets flying around, sort of stuff written on the back of a fact packet, and collating that metadata and giving access to people who needed the metadata was again a bit of a challenge. Giving easy access everywhere in a sort of familiar format was tough, and a lot of the time the feedback we got is that it's the online editor's job to do it, but we don't want them anywhere near our content agent system that we've configured and our ops are doing other stuff on. And again, a lot of the metadata, as I'm sure you know, is the same a lot of the time, so how can I share that, all that, send around templates? So alongside our existing offering for DPP workflows, we came up with meta agents. So this is a very familiar interface. If you've used the DPP app, you'll notice the sort of similar layout. But what it does give you is direct interface into content agents. So I can load up my NLE export or whatever, the export of my final timeline into content agent, fill out the metadata in a really easy to understand format, save as templates, load as templates, share between people, validate certain fields. And then once I'm happy with that, I can just hit a big and send that away to a predefined content agent workflow. So you can define whatever that workflow is. It can be a workflow which caches it for someone to check if the metadata makes sense, which automatically checks the metadata before someone hits go, or makes the whole file. And that gives access to a number of suites to one system, easy extensible access to DPP metadata. So, as I say, easy to understand interface. They can share and pull the templates, which is another request. Many seats around one system, and without altering any existing content agent workflows, they can deploy that in a friendly format to whoever's job it is. So, just to sort of again, a very high-level diagram, several suites that are deployed on the desktop. They can fill out their metadata, send it to the workflow that whatever their operators have decided, and it could notify the relevant team if necessary, and then they've got a file that's ready for tech review, whatever it is. And equally, feedback's really important, right? So feeding that back to the suites and the editors, again, could be automated and driven. So we sort of touched on the topic of correction and validation of files as well. Lots of people sort of implementing elements of our VidChecker in a sort of very specific audio environment and really handling all the requirements of an audio workflow. We've got one of our partners as well here today, Emotion. And they've got a great product offering which is all about being able to automate, correct and understand all common file-based audio problems. So their eFlow workflow engine again allows you to automate things like remapping channels, upmixing, downmixing, Dolby decoding, loudness analysis and whatnot. And again, correct for that. So you can pass through files in an automated fashion. And again, in a similar way to Meta Agent, they have their own e-client, which lets numerous clients submit their audio processing jobs to the main engine, Emotion engine, for the correction. So again, things like automated Dolby decoding and encoding, and something that I think is really cool, correcting and manipulating files in place. So finished assets can be loudness corrected, channels moved around, automatically mixed for audio description, or whatever, tracks removed in place. So again, saving that huge time overhead of demuxing and remuxing files. And again, they've got a new sort of upmixing functionality as well to complement the existing downmixing to go between stereo and 5.1. So if you want to go and get an eyeful of that, they're out back, so you can have a look at that. So as a sort of last topic, what's next and what's coming next? There's been a lot of bold statements made, but where have we got to? So one of the first things we've seen is the SD commercial specification. So if you've had a chance to read that, you will notice that it's very similar to the existing AS-11 UK DPP SD shim. So ostensibly a D10 file, same audio specifications. It does have a few different restrictions and some limitations removed as well. So same essence and structure, same MPEG essence, same PCM essence, same track flagging. It does remove the limitation on the presence of closed captions. It doesn't specify what they can be, so that will generally be down to delivery partner specific. But it does remove the limitation on the presence of closed captions, which is a limitation in the DPP spec. And one of the other things is there's the removal of the, at the moment, requirement for embedded metadata. Now, creating a DMS schema, so a DMS schema is essentially a plugin mechanism to describe metadata in a standard MXF track, so it's really easily and extensively parsed, is actually quite a complex process to do something that's accurate and agreed on. So at the moment, all metadata companies in the DPP, in an XML sidecar, which is something you can do and create a content agent. Some of the other topics that have been mentioned, so internationalization is a brave aim, and will we see AS-11 or some DPP variant adopted? I think the DPP like to think that that would be something that's taken on, but there are a large number of groups of broadcasters already working on their own version of AS-11. Now, AS-11 is much broader. Essence constraints are quite removed, so you can, if you want, pull in all the essences available to you in AS03. So at the moment, the Nordics are very close to having their own version of AS11, which is not related in any way to the DPP specification. We've got Central Europeans, Italians, the Oceanics are very close to making their own AS11 specification. So at the moment, I would say it's more likely that we'll see AS11 internationally than a DPP sort of pushed initiative, but you could be wrong. UHD, again, is something they've touted, and we know very little about what that will be at this time, and some guidance on connectivity. We'll be touching more on UHD in content agent and other workflows this afternoon as the last session, so come back if that's of interest to you. So talking about features, I'd like to now pass over to Rupert, who will talk about DCP and IMF in terms of sort of versioning and stuff. So I will skip over that slide and pass over to Rupert, who will school us on that now.
Good morning, thanks very much for coming. It's good to see so many of you come and visit us. My name is Rupert Watson, I'm the Sales Director at Route 6. Prior to taking over sales, I was reasonably technical, so I've enjoyed the opportunity to talk to you about DCP and IMF. Obviously DCP is something we've been up to for some time. We've got a number of customers, very large customers who are pretty much supplying most of the titles you've enjoyed in cinemas in Europe in the last few years. And IMF is something which is increasingly starting to ripple people's ponds, and I think is probably worth telling you more about, but I suspect very few of you are actually doing it yet, although one or two of you have probably talked to large internet-based VOD, I'm not sure what you call Netflix and then video on demand. Anyway, Netflix is certainly starting to make noises about wanting IMF packages or IMPs delivered, so we'll touch on that later on in the presentation. I'm aware of the time, so I've done the classic kind of thinking my presentation is too short and then padding it out, so I'll try not to detain you too long or overrun too far into the coffee break at 11 o'clock. So let's start off with digital cinema packaging. Clearly it's a specialist end of the market, and again, not necessarily something all our customers are doing, but in actual fact, it's something that you might very well either want to get into as a business, and I'll demonstrate how straightforward it is using the tools that we sell. And I think increasingly people have started to look at using digital cinema packages for more than just commercially released feature films. So, just notice John in the audience there, so I'm just trying to think carefully about how accurate my presentation is. Feel free to make comments later, John, on how accurate I've been. So, the digital cinema package has grown up over the years. Now, it actually began sort of before it was even vaguely formalised, a sort of MPEG file format, so I'll put that in there for completeness, but absolutely nobody is apart from possibly a cruise ship with an old DVD player, is really using that now. Then came what essentially was became known as the interop standard, which was effectively a kind of de facto standard that grew up through the requirement for, to get cracking essentially before SMPTE deliberated, which took a little bit longer than perhaps was commercially required. And because the Digital Cinema Initiative, which was a collaboration of Hollywood studios, were driving the bus, and SMPTE were kind of tagging along behind, nobody really felt that they had to wait for them to arrive, but obviously arrived they have. And what's now happened is that the interop standard, which I'll go on to describe as phase 2 in a minute, has been used since about 2005, yep, there it is, to create of the order of 130,000 DCPs. I'm sure you've been counting, John, it probably felt like more. And the consequence of that is they're out there. There are an awful lot of digital cinema packages in the marketplace, and they are being played out on digital cinema servers that were also created to handle the interop standard. So as SMPTE finally deliberated and delivered in 2013, it turns out that you could in fact generate a DCP of the official kind using the SMPTE standard, which wouldn't necessarily play on all the digital cinema servers in the world. So we managed to get ourselves into a bit of a bind, which is to say the final deliberation of SMPTE, which is the kind of proper phase 2 DCP format, is not necessarily one that you would want to use because there's a danger it might play on all servers. The real overriding reason to use a phase 2 package would be because you're delivering an Atmos digital cinema package, which effectively requires that you use phase 2. But generally speaking, at the moment, if you're talking about digital cinema packages, either to customers or to suppliers, or indeed think of doing it yourself, this is typically kind of the nomenclature that we're using. And this is actually something that I think DBS or Rowan Schwartz, as they've become known, have cooked up. But this isn't really an official naming convention, but this is how we name it in Clipster, and because Clipster's probably the most widely used box, it's certainly a good place to start. So really phase 1 is the interop standard, which was the de facto standard, isn't the official, and phase 2 is the kind of final SMPTE version. So what DCP have done is it's become a solid standard, and there are almost 100% cinemas, I think, worldwide. I think it's incredibly well, if you think about from 2005 to now, it's extraordinary how fast things have moved, unless of course you're a cinema owner, in which case you're probably staring in the barrel of an upgrade, so it's probably less exciting for them. It means essentially that there are very many fewer discs and vans travelling around the country. Increasingly what's happening is people are managing to distribute the files via the network. I mean, that's not 100% yet, and certainly not 100% worldwide, but it's absolutely the direction of travel. And what that's really meant is it's driven a uniformity and a cost reduction, which means that you can now, if you want to, do a release of a film on every single screen in the country, which is certainly not something you could have done prior to that, with a sort of photochemical release print. That would have been regarded as far too expensive and sort of logistically not possible. So the days of you watching a scratchy art house movie in a flea pick, which has been round and round kind of a first release cycle, are pretty much gone. Personally, I think it's a great thing. There are those, certainly with the high frame rate stuff, and there's a lot of chat around the Hobbit releases where they didn't like the kind of video style of the high frame rate stuff. But I think it's a fantastic improvement. And certainly, the rare occasion I get to the cinema, my children allow me to, certainly enjoy it, and the sort of jumpy, scratchy kind of atmospheric effect I don't miss, although I'm sure there are some vinyl fans who similarly enjoy going to watch jumping and scratching, in which case I can recommend the NFT. Alright, an esteemed customer, but generally speaking I think it's been a huge benefit. So how does DCP work? What is it made of? And again, this is partly why I'm doing this, is just to kind of demystify it for people who don't do it for a living. And I apologise for any errors for people who do it for a living. So effectively you've got video inside the digital cinema package, you've got the audio, the composition playlist, which effectively is like a timeline, it is a playlist, it's what you need to play. And obviously you could potentially have more, or it's fairly infrequent video and audio than you've actually got in your composition playlist. So it effectively identifies which bits you want to play. Then you've got the packing list, which is effectively for the digital cinema server to kind of know where everything is. And then a key delivery message, which is only there if you've encrypted it. And then if you've got subtitles, which generally speaking you do, then you've got a subtitle file and the font that you want it to display in. And that effectively is what it looks like. It's no more than a folder with a load of data in. You've got You can see here the video, the audio, the key delivery message. So what this is effectively the Clipster has taken its own public key, the machine that made this, and generated a key delivery message which basically allows it to open it itself. Because it's encrypted, it clearly needs to open it. If you want to edit it later on in the game or reversion it, it'll need to decrypt or unencrypt the video, so it's going to make that for itself to use later on. The composition playlist, the packing list, these are all XML files. The asset map and the volume index, and then this is the subtitle folder, which is the sub-directory of the primary folder. So that's the cinema package, and they tend, in general, I think again, I defer to people in the room who do it for a bit, to generate specific packages for specific films. You don't tend to have a folder full of lots of different versions. It tends to be, that's this version, and then I'll make another one for that version, and then another one for that version. So generally speaking, a lot of the European work is American films coming over here to be turned into sort of Cyrillic subtitles in French and German, Italian and Spanish, and you tend to have a specific folder which has the right version which is going to that cinema. Projectionists not being notorious for their intelligence and scrupulousness, you tend to kind of keep things simple for them. However, one of the benefits of digital cinema packaging is that the reversioning is straightforward, certainly if you're using a Clipster. The composition playlist refers to the video and the audio of XF. If you have to, as I say, reversion it, and particularly the European marketplace involves an awful lot of that, you can effectively open the DCP and it looks like a nonlinear timeline in a Clipster. And then what you do is you effectively take either more content, put it into the timeline, or you take out content that whichever marketplace the film's going to won't tolerate, whether that be people drinking for Saudi Arabia or kind of sex for America, or not America. You can do kind of censor cuts or whatever you need to do, and then what you can do is repackage it, and what that'll do is effectively take anything you've added, re-encode it to J2K, and create a new CPL, which is the XML playlist, and you can obviously add subtitles audio. So it created a very kind of extensible format. You can take your existing DCP, you can modify it ever so slightly, possibly adding audio, subtitle, and audio tracks or subtitle tracks, which isn't a very great deal more data, repackage it, and then on it goes to the cinema, ready to play out in whichever country or region it is. So, how does that look? So, what we've got here is we've got the English titles, the main picture, credits, and then we've got the 5.1 or stereo audio. So, if we wanted to take that and make a new version for the French, because mysteriously they don't speak American, what we're doing here is reversioning it. So again, you've got the original picture, but the new CPL, which is for the French cinema, is going to reference this main picture, not going to reference the English titles. We're going to add some French subtitles and credits, and obviously we've re-recorded the audio, so we've added French subtitles, this one. So this effectively is the English audio, plus the French subtitles. Have I got my arrows on? I'm not sure I've got my arrows quite right there. No. So effectively, this is what we'd end up remaking or repackaging into a new folder, ready to send off to French cinema. So that's the digital cinema package, and we'll kind of revisit that a bit later on with INF, which will make it good. So as far as encryption goes, it's public private exchange. Every DCP server has a public key, which I won't try and explain encryption. You can ask Phil later if you want to know more about it. But effectively, you need to reach out or go to one of the databases that are maintained commercially. There's one called MEL for the UK, which allows you to determine what the public key of the server you're sending your film to. You take the public key and you load it into the Clipster and you generate effectively a KDM. And what happens then is when you send the DCP to that cinema server, it effectively looks in its hardware wherever they've stored it. In the Clipster, it's stored in one of the boards, and it corresponds to, if the two correspond, then you're able to do, or the server can decrypt the key, and then it can play the video and the audio. So within the KDM, the key delivery message, which as I say is an XML file that travels with the digital cinema package, there is a time window that's basically down to the person who's generating it, and you can choose a larger or a smaller one. One of the main complaints, if you do get into this, I've come across in certainly the sort of public sector, the sort of National Film Theatre, the Scottish film festivals and so on, is that the keys are set to narrow, so that moment on a Wednesday morning when they get the chance to go to the cinema and test it isn't actually, the key's not open yet. It opens on Saturday afternoon and closes on Saturday night, which is the agreed kind of exhibition time. So occasionally they can get kind of snooping by it. But generally speaking, it's a means of security and to prevent the film being pinched or shown multiple times more than was originally paid for. So the important point is that DCPs can also be unencrypted. So if, as increasingly seems to be the case, people are using digital cinema packages for non-kind of secure requirements, things like watching rushes, things like previewing VFX, all of these things you can make very quickly and easily on a Clipster, and you can effectively give directors or interested parties the whole kind of cinema experience and have the portability and sort of self-contained nature of the digital cinema package at your disposal, which is clearly a useful and sort of beneficial way of working. And obviously, if you're working in universities or other areas where you don't necessarily have, you're not overly concerned about people nicking the content, then obviously you don't need to kind of muck around with key delivery messages and so on. One brief point, there seems to be a certain amount of confusion about DKDMs, which I haven't kind of created a slide on. Effectively, a distribution KDM is KDM which allows something like a Clipster to reopen the film and then reversion it. So if you're going to take your film and you don't quite know where it's going or whether it's completely finished yet, you would effectively have a DKDM which would allow you to open it on another mastering system and either generate additional KDMs or edit it or change it or supplement the film in some way. So what's coming now, and it obviously it exists already, but we're now going to bring it to the DS Clipster, is watermarking and fingerprinting, whose terms have been not helpfully mixed in their usage. So it's not quite clear when you're talking about watermarking and fingerprinting which of the kind of two technologies they're talking about. So one would assume that watermarking is visible. You would be mildly incorrect. Some people describe watermarking or talk about watermarking, and what they talk about is invisible watermarking. And effectively the point is, if you watermark something, you're typically putting your name and address, your street, the universe, etc. on it, such that if you want to, you can derive that information using software, typically a company called Civolution, have a product called NextGuard, and what that allows you to do is take the video data that you've got to the manager or to their software, and you can essentially reveal you can scratch off the surface and see where it came from, which content owner owns it. So fingerprinting, however, is invisible, and the idea behind fingerprinting, and this is certainly my understanding of it, I'm quite happy to be corrected, is that I gave it to you. So for example, you can put things like the cinema that it's been sent to, the producer that's been given the screener, whoever it is, and obviously the point behind that is, if it pops up on the internet, you can very quickly identify who allowed it to get there. And I discovered the other day, talking to Apple, I was doing an Apple presentation while back, apparently they issue unique code names to all their various divisions for the same device. So if they're working on the iPhone 7 and you're in the hardware division, you get to call it by one product code name, and if you're working in marketing, you call the same thing by a different code name. And by this method, they hope to determine when it pops up in the press, which division in Apple have slipped it out. Very cunning. Right, so Civolution NextGuard, as I mentioned, we've got a server, and again, this is something that we can now do, so it's again an area where we were learning a bit more. So you've basically got a server, which is managing your database and the content that you want to insert into the timeline using the Clipster, and then what you need is, for the various applications that can handle delivering the whole NextGuard user experience, is a plugin and a connector in your application, and effectively the connector talks to the database, and the plugin writes it into the video audio content as you desire. And all you then need, and this is the bit that we're not quite sure kind of how to do yet, we've got to find software to do this, which I think is also supplied by Civolution, and you can analyse the media to determine its origin, and then obviously you can proceed to go and collect a large fine. So, digital cinema packaging, not difficult, very straightforward using the right tools, and if it is something you're interested in, do come and have a chat with us. There is about to be a brand new version of Clipster 6, which is super duper fast, and you'll get to go home much earlier and see your wife much more frequently. So, IMF packaging. Why does this exist? So there's been, and you probably haven't, you've probably noticed there's been a tremendous number of formats and so on, and tape essentially is all but died. I'm sure there are one or two people still making tapes, but on the whole, it's not something that's going to be a workflow that lasts very much longer. And the problem we all of us face is that there isn't really an easy and robust way to distribute assets on a business-to-business basis. There are various things like AS-11 and AS-02, but they don't really answer the need of keeping track of the multiple languages, subtitles, video inserts, and so on and so forth that you need to sort of effectively exchange data from, for example, Disney and Hollywood to Technicolor in the UK to sort of remake versions and send it off to television companies and to Netflix and iTunes and all the rest of it. So what is IMF and how does it work? So effectively the intention behind an IMF, which is the interoperable master format, I just want to say mezzanine, I think it's master. It's a contribution format for B2B, and it's effectively, the intention behind it is it is like an HD cam tape, if you like, in the sense that it's the finished master. Everything inside an IMP is what you need to give to somebody to stick in the tape deck and make a VHS copy of it. So it's effectively the digital version of that. If I sent you my HDCam master, you could make me whatever in the tape-based run, or you could ingest it and you could generate QuickTime movies and all the rest of it. So the intention behind it is the finished master that I can send out to trusted colleagues and other businesses to do what I need them to do commercially. So it's also a SMPTE standard, which, as you probably worked out from the earlier bit, the DCP was born a little before SMPTE got involved. So now IMF is being created in conjunction with SMPTE. So if you go to the IMF website, which I'll put up a bit later, they are actually, you do need to be a member of SMPTE in order to kind of read all the bits and pieces on there. And it is loosely based on DCP. So the reason it's good is it keeps storage usage down. The idea behind that is, obviously at the moment, I can't remember exactly how many versions Disney do, but it's in the mid-hundreds. And every single version that they do, I think there are 42, officially 42 subtitle versions and all the various high definition, standard definition, and different aspect ratios. Generally speaking, you're in the area of 120, I think I'm right in remembering, QuickTime movies of 90-minute duration that are being moved around the world. So if you are working with Disney, you potentially are downloading 120 90-minute ProRes, high-quality ProRes files in order to do all the various things that they might want you to do. That clearly is an unconscionable amount of data, and realistically, IMF is intended to remove the requirement to move all that individually self-contained data out, because clearly there are going to be a lot of pictures and sounds in those QuickTime movies that are common across the board. So it uses J2K mezzanine level compression. There are other formats specified, but on the whole it's unlikely anybody's going to use them, although I think there have been various manufacturers who've insisted that their particular file flavour has been included in the specification, but they're not looking like they're going to get used very widely. And effectively it stores the differences, so it doesn't take 120 flattened versions. It takes primary video, primary audio, and as you saw earlier on, if you were looking at the demonstration, you can reference that primary video and audio many, many times with XML files, which is how you do the versioning. And it allows, exactly like the DCP, for flexible versioning, which we'll get into in a minute. So who's going to use it? We're going to get into that, but effectively anybody who's involved in business-to-business transactions using video and audio content, those people there. And how are they going to use it? Well, effectively, content owners are going to clearly send it out as their kind of master. Distributors are going to receive it in order to make whatever it is I require them to make. If I need you to upload to iTunes, I've got somebody else making my iPhone version, yet another person preparing my content for BBC, then that's how it's going to work. So, for example, in the UK, ITFC used to receive the video content for Channel 5 and prepare it for their transmission. In sort of latter days now, I imagine they'll get an IMF package or IMP, and they will prepare it for use later on. So this is kind of what it looks like. A picture to explain what I failed to explain words. So you've got all of the content coming on the left-hand side. You've got QuickTime movies, DNX HD, GoPro, ABC HD, all of the sort of plethora of formats that we're getting used to handling, all of which are coming to the various people who are preparing content which is laterally going to be sold and or redistributed. That all gets filtered down into IMF, and then everybody who's at the sort of latter end of the process who are generating RMB more file formats can either use the IMF internally to make them, or store it and use it repeatedly ad infinitum. And this is to say, the intention is it's business to business. This isn't intended to kind of get out into the wider world. So we're still going to be using AS-11 for transmission, sort of quick time movies and all the rest of it, and Blu-rays for distribution to punters. So I may be at risk of kind of looking like I make a bit of a meal of this, but as you can see, if you look at a picture of, you've got your production sort of end of the process, which is pretty much where it all begins. And then you've got your conforming and colour correction and so on and so forth. And then some sort of digital intermediate asset, whatever it is you're using internally, that tends to be variously DPX or DNX or ProRes or whatever flavour of intermediate format you're using inside your business. And then you've got your various image versions, so you've got the various aspect ratios, high definition, standard definition, etc. And you potentially have to do all the various language versioning. And then you've got subtitling, and then you've got your versions, and now you've got to deal with all platforms, so now having turned it all into these versions, now you've got to redistribute it to these various platforms in their various weapons of choice. Currently Netflix certainly are getting into having IMF delivered to them, but no doubt you've got to deal with this internally, and then ultimately it goes out to the customer. So you can see that's not that's no means feat. And looking at it like that, you do think, shit, that's quite a lot of work. So how do you solve that? Well, in essence, the idea behind IMF is it basically sits on this more complex area and allows you to simplify this whole process and to contain all of that within the IMF package. So what does it look like? So here's roughly how it lays out. And it's not 100 million miles away from the DCP. So you've got the CPO, which is roughly like a decision list or a cut list. It's an XML file that describes what goes where and when, and it effectively allows you to assemble what you want to from the video tracks, the audio tracks, and the data and metadata tracks. And it supports all of the things you need, so captions and subtitles, captions on subtitles. And it's wrapped in effectively what was designed to be AS-02, but isn't quite as defined in terms of the folder structure. And then once you've got all that, you've got your output profile list, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then you've got an asset map and your packaging list. So all of that adds up to an IMP, and that's effectively kind of like your HDCAM master. It's all in there, and if you wanted to, you could make an American IMP, and that's it. That's the canonical version. That's what the studio say Cinderella looks like. Done. That's all very well, you said. You've got lots of different file-based things to do, so there are market trends which mean that this isn't getting any simpler, there's more and more stuff going on. There are companies like Netflix and Amazon and Apple who are entirely file-based, and every single file-based recipient is going to want a different flavour, so at some point somebody's going to have to get around to making those. HDCAM is pretty much done, so the reason you should care is you're going to have to replace it with something, otherwise you're going to have an incredibly complex workflow forever inside of your facility or your business. I don't know if anybody here is labouring under the misapprehension that AS-11 is a mastering format, but clearly it isn't. It's a delivery format, it's a transmission format. It was never intended to be used as a master format, so if you're putting AS-11 files on the shelf for kind of reversioning later, then you're making a fairly large category error. AS-02 is an exchange format, is designed to be put on the shelf for reversion later, but it doesn't have anything like the sort of self-contained, where the fuck is everything kind of nature of IMF. With an IMF, you basically got everything in. So, what are you doing now? Probably saving DNX, ProRes, possibly putting on tape. If you're doing that, I've no idea where you're keeping the stems, whether or not you know what the subtitle files are that you made for the various versions that are already. If you're making tape masters, 10 years from now, you're going to be able to recapture them. I wouldn't put money on it. Well, you kind of ring up a guy who's kept keeping an HDCAM carefully looked after, like Phil, that's got some digibetas knocking around. Again, AS-11 files, not as a master format. There are some companies, the farm, for example, talk about spots, which I think is single program on the shelf. I think the idea there is you attempt to assemble all of this stuff and you store it in one place and you create a proxy for people to refer to, and that will potentially allow you to go back to and reversion from that. But effectively, it's kind of, that's already been done with IMF. That's kind of the same sort of idea. And I hope nobody here is doing it, but we do bump into quite a few customers who've got the discs in a cupboard. We went to one customer in Bermondsey, I think it was. We asked him, where's your archive? And it's kind of floor to ceiling cupboard. And they went, it's in here. It was just GRA drives from floor to ceiling, which was quite extraordinary to behold. Right, so swiftly, as it's now getting to 11:05, has done. So in honour of our German friends who make the clipster, they're go back to making the French version of a German IMP. So the idea here is you've got your finished, this is done, everything's in here, a bit like where I showed you earlier, where you put a little blue box on top of all of the various subtitles, video, etc. So this is a finished film or television program that's able to be, it's ready to be transmitted or turned into an AS-11 for transmission on German TV. I've sold it to the French, so I need to subtitle it because they strangely don't speak German either. So that's how that's done. You simply, take the IMP, open it up, get in something like Clipster, get your French subtitles, pop them in the timeline, line them up, make sure they work, and then generate effectively another IMP from that, which would contain the German IMP and the French subtitles. And this is where we start to diverge from the DCP. So this is going to be an English dub with a new CPL. Now we could do this the hard way and reference sort of individual assets and so on and so forth, but probably the simplest thing is to take the original German one, put my English up against it, and the video. Oh, sorry, that's not confused myself. So obviously we don't need the explicit video track here because, in essence, everything is in the German IMP that I need, and all I'm going to do is reference the audio and put my English titles and credits on top, and again package that all up as a separate, or as an additional CPL. So ultimately, this is where we would get to with an IMF package. You haven't got individual folders, video and audio and subtitle data for each version. What you've effectively got is everything in one place from which you can strike depending on who you are, what you need. So if I need the German version, it's in here. If I need the English version, it's in here. If I need the French version or the French subtitles, it's in here as well. So that's the idea of the IMF. You've got a single repository for absolutely everything that commercially you could want anybody to make, whether it be your own in-house operation or whether you're sending out to some sort of distribution company who's going to make various versions for you. So the output production list is not quite finished yet, but it does potentially represent a massive breakthrough. So previously, you would get a 30-page Word document from whoever you're distributing it to, and they would say, we need the MPEG file to be in this GOP structure, and it needs to have this sort of audio, and it must have this many tracks, and they have to have this and this and this on tracks 1, 2, and 5, and 7, and 8, and so on. The idea behind the OPL is effectively it's an XML file that describes all of that, and you would take the OPL from the IMF package, or there would be multiple OPLs in there which determine how the ITV guys want it, how BBC wants it, how Netflix wants it, how iTunes want it, how Apple TV wants it. And from that, you could take the OPL, and in our case, we would convert it to a content agent workflow, which would allow you to take the IMF package, the J2K Essence and the PCM audio, and turn it out as a Netflix version, or turn it out as an iTunes version, or knock it off for the BBC standard definition, 14:9 transmission, or whatever it might be. So the idea is to reduce the complexity and allow effectively the Hollywood studios to control much more directly and reach right out into your business and make the files that they want made in a way that is consistent with how they want them to look and what sort of shape and size they're going to be. And so of course you can just sit back and count the money because it'll be far less complex, and no one's going to have to worry too much or know too much. And we all know that's exactly how the future turns out. So these are the summit uplands that we're talking of. So the idea is that you've got your cinema, digital cinema, obviously photochemical films still knocking around a bit, and then you've got home and mobile, on-demand, linear, retail, and you've got all of these various output deliverables that you've got to service and provide, all of which contain their own complexities. And the idea really behind the IMF and OPL is to attempt to extract some of the complexity and provide some consistency in terms of how you will navigate your way as a business through that whole process. So, we do this. So, I want to do all of these things. Again, time's marching on, so I'm not going to yap too much about these, but effectively, you might want to do that. I just want to quickly talk about package merging. So, here you can see one of the list of things we're kind of putting in is this idea of package merging with hard linking. Unfortunately, this isn't something we can do in digital cinema yet, although we are heading in that direction. The idea is, obviously, if you've got all of these IMPs, you might have 30 or 40 different versions. There's almost certainly common media in there, and there may well be duplication, which is something you probably don't want, but you don't also necessarily want to kind of copy everything into one place. So what the Clipster allows you to do is you take your various IMPs, you drop them into effectively a little window, and it will then go around and find the relevant IDs on all the various places that they've been stored and create hard links. So you have now got effectively one place where you can find everything, and that every reference is to various versions, but it doesn't contain, so it doesn't use up any more space. It's a very cunning way of doing it. So all of this is promised, and just as an outrageous plug, so really what we're talking about is this box here makes life a great deal easier. This is what we sell, which allows you to do all of these things, and it is effectively, as you can see here, represented to the user as if it were an enormous non-linear editing device. And it allows you to do kind of the human user interaction on it is fairly straightforward, but all of the back-end intelligence that provides both the digital cinema packaging and the IMF packaging is taken care of on the back end by those coming journals. Now, obviously, it's a SMPTE standard, so I would be deceiving you if I claim that we can do this. There are plenty of other products around that are attempting to do the same sort of thing. However, the Clips has been around, and the Hollywood studios have used it to such a great extent to sort of develop IMF that I would suggest that we are a very great deal further forward than anybody else, and certainly it's not faster, but it's based on hardware. And the IMF version of it is a great deal less expensive than perhaps traditionally people would assume it would be for the digital cinema. And what I've got here, I'm just going to quickly highlight this in honour of the boys at Apple. That's quite a weird curve there going on. So this is the storage that we also are currently talking about, and I just wanted to take a chance to show you quickly what I've got you all here. So this is basically a 1U unit, has 30 discs inside it, can be configured in a variety of different shapes and sizes. It will deliver with SSDs 3 gigabytes per second for every 1U box. It's got 4 16 gigabit fibre channel devices and 2 10 gig in each one. And as I say, it comes in a 1U rack mount. It is, however, 1 metre deep, just so you know. But that's how you get that much space of storage into one space. So effectively, we're talking about 60 terabytes in 1U. And in fact, there is one company who did once ask us for storage based on how much space it didn't take up in their rack. So I guess that is consideration. So it's incredibly dense. It's got in 1U 2 racks of discs. You have to see it to believe it. It's quite an engineering marvel. It's all manufactured by Rowan Schwartz near the Czech border. And you've also got this module here, which is a self-contained IO module. So everything is kind of easily hot swappable when it's in the rack. You don't have to sort of take the lid off and muck around with it. And just to give you a sense of it, to performance, so with SAS discs in, we're talking about being able to do 2 streams of 4K in a 1U box, or 1 stream of 60p. These are all uncompressed, clearly. Something like 80 streams of XCAM, or 20 of DNX, 220, etc. So it's a fairly potent box, and you can stack pretty much as many as you like out on top of that. I should go to questions and let Bill know if you've got any questions. And while we're taking questions, I'll just leave that there, so if you are interested in looking up any of this information, you can write those down and go off and enjoy. As I say, I recommend joining SMPTE. It's a good thing anyway, but if you want to look up more information on the IMF page, you will need to be a member, because they've hidden a lot of the stuff kind of behind the SMPTE, so they're trying to encourage SMPTE membership. Thank you very much for listening. Sorry for cantering, I realised the time was getting away from me, so I don't want to keep you in coffee. Does anybody have any questions, or have I beaten you into submission? I thought so. Try to help yourselves to coffee at the back.